So I just wanted to talk to you guys about a really simple way in which you can compare your drawing to the reference photo, and that is by turning the reference and an image of your drawing into grayscale. So what I've done here is I have my drawing and I have the reference image. Now obviously the photo of my drawing isn't going to be completely accurate to the depth of colours and everything, but you can kind of gauge where you need to sort of strengthen your shadows and where you need to lighten certain areas, and it's so much easier to tell all the different tones in this way. So what I've done here is just got a screen recording going of my Photoshop, and you can see my drawing compared to the reference photo here. So by comparing the two, I can straight away see that on my drawing I really need to go in and I need to darken up these dark areas in between the feathers. Either that, or I need to go through and lighten those brighter feathers that are sitting on top a little bit more. So I need to strengthen those values underneath the wing there, and I also need to go through and darken the tail up a little bit more and the underside of the wing here. I can also see that, as I predicted, that the area of the breast of my drawing isn't quite dark enough, and I need to go through there and darken that a little bit more. I need to bring the highlight out in the beak a bit more, as well as the eye. There's a few areas that I need to lighten through the wing and down here, and there's a few areas that I need to darken on the left hand side of the breast of my drawing here. So it's much easier to compare your drawing compared to the reference in this manner. You can kind of see the tones and the values a lot more clearly. So there's a few things there that I need to adjust. So what I'm going to do before I jump into the next part of the tutorial, which will be the feet and the branch, I'm just going to make those adjustments, and then when I jump back to the footage of me drawing the robin, I will talk to you guys and walk you through what exactly I've done and how I've made the changes to get the contrasts and the values correct within the robin. Okay, so I've gone through and I have adjusted a few of the colours. I've inverted the drawing image that I imported onto my Mac in Photoshop, and I've also inverted the actual reference photo both into grayscale so I could see what areas needed adjusting and what ones needed lightening, darkening, that kind of thing. So all I've done is basically just use exactly the same coloured pencils. So I've used the pencils from our list here, mainly the Cerulean Brown and a little bit of that Scarlet. And I've just gone through and I've added some more red down into the grey here so that it's a little bit darker. I've also gone through and just added a little bit more walnut brown and Cerulean Brown through this section, this shadowed section here. I've just gone through and added some more of that Cerulean Brown into these darker areas. I feel like it gives it a lot more contrast just by adding that colour into there, and it also ties the darker areas on the grey into the breast a little bit more and just is a little bit more tied together there. And I've gone through and just darkened a few areas on the tail. Again, I've added that Cerulean Brown into the shadows through the wing here, just so that everything is really tied together. You get a really nice cohesive look and the colour scheme is all working nicely together. I've gone through and added some more of that Cerulean Brown to the eyes, around the beak. On the beak, I've also gone in with that Cerulean Brown. I've gone in with some more dark sepia and just really darkened up those shadows, and I've really gone in with a hard pressure on the white and added in that top highlight on the beak there. And that's pretty much all that I've done. Just adjusted all of those areas, really made sure that the contrast was accurate on there. So what I'm going to do now is the feet. So this is one of the hardest areas. It's one that I find difficult myself and one that I really don't look forward to at all. And what I'm actually going to get out here is a white gel pen, because I feel like it's going to be so much easier just to add in those white highlights on the feet and everything by going through with the gel pen rather than leaving the paperwork, because it's going to be really tiny. So I'm just going to pick out my gel pen, which is the Uniball Signo. I'll add this to the materials list for you guys, so you won't have to worry about needing it halfway through. And all I'm going to do, I'm not going to bother erasing any of the graphite or anything, just going to keep it all down there. And I'm just going to go straight in with the warm grey one and add a base layer. So we're going to add this all over. So we're going to do both feet at the same time here. They're only tiny, tiny little feet, so we're just going to add in the base layer. So I've got a sharp side on my coloured pencil, which I'm just using now. And I'm just going and adding a shading motion back and forth over the entire thing here. There's no particular direction to worry about at all, so I'm also going through and just shading down with some circular motions. But pretty much just getting all of that down, filling the entire thing, and the same with this leg over here as well. So all the way up to the body there. Like so. And then we just need to concentrate on our darks. So I'm going to go in with the dark sepia to begin with. Going to make sure it's really nice and sharp, and we're literally just going to add in all of the dark areas. So I've got a really nice sharp pencil there. So we're going to start on this left hand foot here. This one is in a lot more shadow. This is the darkest area. So I'm going to try and leave the paper white as much as possible, but I'm not going to worry if I can't, because I'm going to go in with that white gel pen and add all of those highlights in. But for the time being, I'm just going to loosely go in with the dark sepia. Just really, really lightly sketch this in. So I'm adding in the darker area, which is behind this tiny little toe here. So just going through that one. Coming all the way back to the body. And then on the underside of this one that comes through here, the middle toe here, we're going to add this dark colour at the top. So where it's sitting against the branch there, I guess. And then we're going to go in and darken, so going in with quite a heavy pressure, just going in and just layering this down. And then the same with this left hand toe here, we're going to add all of the shadow on the underside. So this is really, really delicate work. It's absolutely tiny. I'm just going in and adding in all of the darker areas and leaving the whiter areas. You can see the foot actually looks really quite scary at the moment. Just going in and really lightly shading. I'm going to go and add some of that Perylene brown into this dark area here coming back towards the body. So like I've done through here, you can see the red tone coming through in those darker areas there. So I'm just going through and adding the Cerulean Brown in exactly the same. So adding that down so we get some really nice dark tones. And then what I'm going to do is just add a layer of the cinnamon over all of the open areas here, because the foot is actually quite like a pinky brown tone. So the cinnamon is absolutely perfect. So I'm just going in here with the cinnamon all over. As I said, we're going to use the gel pen for the highlights. And then I'm going to take the nougat and the walnut brown and just shade some of these areas. So I'm just going to just use my sanding block here just to get a sharp side of the nougat and the walnut brown. So I want a really nice sharp edge, but I want to keep the tip quite small, so that's why I've just gone in there and used my sanding block. You don't necessarily need a sanding block, you can use a sharpener or sandpaper. I'm just going in and just adding in some of those mid-tones. Using the walnut brown. It's adding in really tiny details. I realise that my hand is probably in the way on the main camera, the top down one. I'm really hoping that the footage from my secondary camera doesn't corrupt, because I was just checking back the footage from the previous parts and some of it has corrupted, and in some areas where I'd like to use that footage I can't because it's corrupted. So I really hope that it doesn't do it on this part, because otherwise my hand is going to be in the way. So fingers crossed that you are viewing the secondary footage and not the main camera. Just going in and using the Cerulean Brown really lightly to create that soft pink. And I think that's pretty much it for that foot. So we're going to go in and use the gel pen to just pick out some of those highlights. And I'm also going to use a gel pen here to pick out the highlights in the eye. So I'm going to do both of these at the same time. So we've got a really bright highlight. I'm just going to scribble that down there. Just going to pick out the really bright highlight in the eye here, just by dotting the gel pen in. Pick that out, really nice and bright, perfect. And then on the feet, it's mainly on the top sides here that we need to add in these highlights. So again, I'm just going in and using the dotting approach. This is the way that this pen seems to work the best, is by going in and dotting. Just adding in some really subtle tiny highlights. Just need to adjust this foot just here, bring this dark area over a little bit more, like that. And we need to obviously go through and add the claws. So I'm just going to go through with the nougat, just add that in, and then the walnut brown on the underside. So again, a really delicate operation here. So tiny, these little details. You just need like pinprick pencil marks to make up those details. There we go. So then I'm going to turn the attention to the second foot. This one's got a little bit more detail and a little bit more highlight on it, but we're going to go in with the same approach. We're going to go in with the dark sepia first, add in some of those darker areas, and then we're going to go through, fill it out with some cinnamon, tone with some cerulean brown and some walnut brown and stuff, and then add in any highlights. So down the very centre of the leg there is a dark area, which we're just going to add in, like so, and then you've got some lines coming along the foot, like a little cylinder block there, and then in between in the toes here, and so you've got a lot more shadow. And on either side of the toes here as well, so the main toe, the middle one, there's a shadow coming along the left hand side, and then on the right hand side there's a shadow in between the toes, as you would expect. And then on this right hand toe there's a shadow on the left hand side. I'm going to add in a tiny little claws. Just add in all of the knuckles, just add in tiny little dots either side of this shadow just to bring in the sort of texture of the toe. So even though I don't like to draw bird feet, the more that you practice something, the better you become at it and the more confident you become. And already I'm not quite understanding why I was so threatened by the thought of doing the bird feet, but they're actually coming together pretty easily and pretty nicely, so I'm quite pleased with that. I'm just going through and just darkening certain areas, just adding in tiny little nodules onto the sides of some of these shadows to represent the knuckles and everything of the bird feet, which is really important. So now that those are in, I'm just going to go through and add a layer of the cinnamon over the entire leg and foot area. Like so. And then I can start to shade with some of the cerulean brown. Just going to give it a little bit of a sand. And then just start to shade around some of these shadows into the shadowed areas, just fill in some of the darker red tone. This side also has a little bit of a cooler tone, so I'm actually going to go through with some of the Delft blue as well into those shadowed areas. Just going to overlay some Delft blue. Go back in with some of the dark sepia and really darken areas up and add in some of these lines and knuckles and stuff. I'm going to use a little bit of the white pencil just to go along the side of the leg there. I'm just going to use a sanding block to get one sharp edge, so I can just go in and smooth some of these areas out with the white pencil. And just shade with the dark sepia as well. I think so. And then I'm going to use the white gel pen just to bring out a few highlights down the very centre area of that long front toe. This is a really delicate operation just in itself, just adding in the gel pen, trying to get it to lay down on the coloured pencil. As I said, this isn't the best gel pen to use. There we go. There's 2 feet. 2 complete feet on the robin there. Pretty happy with how that they are looking. And we'll make any adjustments that we need to make when we've started to add some of the branch tones and textures and all that jazz. So what we're going to do now is work on this branch texture. It's not going to be too difficult to actually convey. It's just going to be a mixture of the May green, some of the nougat and a little bit of that Indian red. So we're going to mainly use the brown tones. Obviously we're going to use the warm grey one. It's going to be a little bit of cinnamon in there, and of course we're going to add a few of the colours that are going on in the robin just to tie the branch and the robin together real nicely. So what we're going to do is just erase the outside edges of the graphite on the branch up here. And then we're going to add a base layer of the warm grey one. I'm actually just going to try and find a pencil extender for the warm grey one and give it a quick sharpen. I don't think I have a pencil extender handy. I'm going to have to pinch it off of another pencil somewhere. Okay. So just want to erase the graphite here, just along here. So we're going to do this branch in thirds. So we're going to do the first third up to about here, then we're going to do the bit underneath the feet, and then we're going to do the back part. I'm going to do it in 3 sections, so it's much easier to manage. It's not going to be too difficult to render this anyway, it's going to be pretty simple. I am just going to use a little bit of my Scotch Magic tape just to tape off the end here so we get a nice edge for when I want to frame. So I need to come in just to about there. And then all I'm going to do is just outline the top edge of the branch with the warm grey and the bottom edge of the branch all the way along to where we've erased. And then all I'm going to do is just pretty much just shade in like a diagonal motion over the entire section. So I'm just going over, really loosely and lightly shading. You can see the direction in which I'm shading. I'm sort of working in this sort of diagonal region like this. It's working really lightly over the entire thing. You can see how I'm holding the pencil. I'm holding it quite far back. It's to limit the amount of pressure and control that I'm able to put through the pencil so I can get some really nice even smooth layers. Not going in with too hard a pressure and damaging the tooth of the paper at all. So I'm just going to work up to about there. It's about 1/3 of the branch. And then what I'm going to do is just work in a slightly different direction and add another layer of the warm grey one over here. So I want to create a really nice smooth surface to work on. So that's why I'm going in a completely opposite direction as well. Okay, so now that that is down, what we're going to do is just work on building from our lighter colours to our darker colours. So we're going to use a mixture of the nougat and May green and the Indian red for the bottom section. For the top section, we're mainly going to keep it like pretty much the warm grey one. I'm going to mix it with a tiny little bit of nougat and create that sort of mottled effect. I'm just giving the Indian red a little bit of a sharpen for when we go into the bottom area. So I'm going to take the nougat and we're just going to work the nougat in a sort of circular motion, just really, really lightly. And we're just going to leave sort of an open texture. So we're keeping some areas quite open and white. This is going to work better if I don't have a sanded side to the pencil, so I'm just going to give that a quick sharpen. So you want a nice sharp pencil as always. I'm going to go around about halfway down the branch because that's when it starts to get a little bit darker and that's when we need to introduce a lot more of that green. So I'm just slowly building circular motions with the pencil. Keeping the texture and the shading quite open, so I'm leaving areas of white and just sort of dancing the pencil around. I'm going to work in this way and then I'm going to come back over and work in the opposite direction again to keep a nice smooth surface. And I'm holding the pencil really far back at this point so that I don't put that much pressure through the tip. Going all the way down to about there. So it's really, really faint at the moment. Then I'm just going to work over, going in a slightly different direction, and just darken up certain areas of that nougat where you've got slightly darker brown texture, which is more towards the middle of the branch. Again, keeping that circular motion. Holding the pencil quite far back. So just quite slowly building up that darker texture. Just bringing it down a little bit further in a few places as well. And then what I'm going to do is just really loosely shade the May green in exactly the same sort of manner, mainly working from the middle and then really lightly adding it towards the top. So just shading in the middle here. Just really lightly adding it to this top section. Just really light layer of that colour down there, just a hint of green. We're also going to use the warm grey 5 here, and we're just going to darken up the mid section. So this is going to help to create the three-dimensional look of the branch. So I'm just going in between some of these brown and white areas in exactly the same motion with the pencil, just using those circular motions. Just adding this down. In between here, so we get that nice smooth texture going on. We will smooth this out even more with some of the white pencil in areas that I feel it needs it. But the texture is building really nicely as it is. I quite like the grainy look that it's got going on here there, where you can see a little bit of the paper white showing through. I quite like that effect. It's giving a really nice contrast to the smooth feathers of the robin. So I'm just using the reference as a complete guide here. I'm not following it too closely, just sort of making up my own unique sort of branch texture, how I feel that the shadows and all that are sitting. Just sort of using the reference, as a guide, but just making my own sort of texture up here. I feel like that's going to have a much better outcome than following the reference 100%. And if you guys are feeling extravagant, feel free to add berries or leaves or anything to the branch itself. Anything that you feel is going to add to your piece or that you want to add, just feel free to do that. You don't need to follow the reference 100% all the time. So just going through and just adding in a few more areas of brown, a little bit of stronger colour through the centre here. I'm going to go over the top area with another layer of the warm grey 1, and it's just going to help to smooth this out in certain areas. So it's sort of almost like a blurry effect that we've got going on here. But we've got that sort of smooth texture where it's sort of covered in a little bit of moss, a little bit of algae. I'm going to just hype up some of the green values around some of the darker areas where you'd expect the green to be a little bit more prominent. And I'm also going to go in now with a tiny little bit of the Indian red just through the centre where we've added that warm grey 5. Just going to get that Indian red going in through there. So you'll notice the way that I'm holding my pencils throughout the entire time I'm drawing this branch. I'm holding them quite far back, generally quite on the side, so I'm limiting the pressure putting through the tip of the pencil. That's kind of the idea, to try and get this really nice light texture like we've got going on here. So I now need to go through and do the underside of the branch. This is where it gets a little bit more colour intense. So what I'm going to do here, we've already got that layer of the warm grey one down. But I'm just going to add another layer down so that we've got a nice smooth layer and surface to work upon. So there's 3 layers of the warm grey one on the bottom half here, and I'm going to blend that through the top half as well so that you don't get this, just all of a sudden this darker area. And then I'm just going to go through with the May green, pretty much just really lightly shade this over the entire bottom area here. So again, using that sort of diagonal pencil stroke. Like so. And then just going to go through and just strengthen that green tone a little bit more. We're going to go in between this green with some of the warm grey 5 and the walnut brown, the dark sepia, and then the Indian red as well. So built that green tone a little bit there. Then we can go in with our grey and just bring this middle section down a little bit more. So I'm concentrating a lot more of the grey onto the bottom half of the log, but just making sure that I also work it through the entire section of the branch as well. So I'm just sort of shading back and forth for this, just to create this more of a liney texture where you've got the broken up bits of moss, or I'm not exactly sure what you call the stuff that's on this branch. But just using more sort of lines and circular motions just to break up some of that green to create that sort of like a liney texture. So I'm just going through and just shading a little bit more of a solid line of the warm grey 5 on the bottom, which we're going to overlay with some of the walnut brown. So on the very underneath, I'm going to go through with that walnut brown. Really darken this up, especially along the very bottom edge, along that very bottom line. And then we're just going to blend the brown like we've done, the same sort of texture here, just going to blend that through the green. Just come up with the texture, continuing with this sort of circular motion to create the illusion that there's some of that sort of crackled texture through here. And again, just making sure that we leave gaps where you've got this green poking through. I'm going to use the Indian red as well, just on some of these darker areas. You do have that sort of red tone peeping through as well. I'm going to go through and just hype up some of the saturation of the green as well as we're going through. I'm just sort of making some lines and just making these areas sort of intertwine with one another, and then I'm going through and blending them out with a really light hand using some circular motions with the walnut brown, and then just going in and strengthening everything. So adding some really dark crevices, really dark shadows and stuff. But the premise of this texture is just going through, adding in some lines and then blending them out with some circular motions, adding in some more mid-tones, so some more of that Indian red, and then hyping up some of the green with the May green in certain areas as well. We'll also need to just go through in certain areas with the dark sepia just to really darken and knock back some of the colours, especially on this very underside. So I'm just going to work this texture up the branch a little bit more, so it's coming past the midway and then sort of blending into the lighter section on the top here. I need to sharpen up this walnut brown because it's got a flat edge where I've sanded it slightly. So with a nice sharp pencil should be a lot easier as well to get into the grooves of the paper. So again, just strengthening this underside here, creating some gaps of green, some lines, crisscrossing it all over. So just being really quite rough with the texture at this point. So you get a structure that sort of looks like this. So just do this all the way along so that you can see the kind of texture that I'm building up as a base when I'm saying that I'm creating these lines and sort of open pockets of green, crisscrossing like so. So you end up with a really rough looking texture like this. And then all I'm doing is then just taking the point of the walnut brown pencil and just really lightly going over with circular motions and just shading this out. So you can see I'm holding the pencil quite far back, using the very point of the pencil and just blending and shading those out a little bit. Darkening that underside and then going through with the green and really saturating some of these green areas through the middle. blending it up towards the top as well, so you've got a darker green up here. And then going through with some of the Indian red as well into these areas of the walnut brown, and just creating little channels of red running through the branch as well to break up that green. And the red and the green actually work really, really nicely together. Going along the bottom with the red just to darken that up. Then going through with the walnut brown once more to continue darkening, and then I'm going to go through with some dark sepia and just darken up the real dark areas. So again, just going through and adding some more precise lines in the things, and then just blending them out where necessary. So we get this really nice smooth texture on top, where the light's hitting and sort of dissipating some of that texture and that detail. And then on the bottom here you've got all of these shadows which are bringing out all of the crevices and the lights and the darks, and that's what we're trying to convey. As I said though, it doesn't matter if you're following your reference 100%. I'm using mine as a guide for the shadows and any sort of little knots within the wood. That's what I'm just sort of using my reference for. Just adding some darker details through here as well. Darkening up a few sections through the top. When we come down to this side down here, it becomes a lot more lighter and the texture becomes a lot smoother as well, so it's going to be a lot easier the more that we come down. So I'm just going to go through with some dark sepia and really darken up this underside, this very bottom edge. We want the branch to look three-dimensional, so we need this shading underneath. Real dark sections underneath the branch, and then on top we want to keep it really nice and light and smooth. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with how that texture has developed there. We're going to move on to the next area of texture, so we're going to do this bit underneath the feet, so we're going to do up to the end of the toe here. Going to fill in that entire section just using exactly the same technique, so going through and really lightly layering some really soft colours on the top, and then going through and adding in that texture on the bottom. As I said, when you get to about here, this is where the texture starts to smooth out a little bit and it just becomes really, really nice and smooth. So coming down to here is going to be a lot easier to fill in. So we're going to do the next part of the branch now. So with this section I'm just going to do exactly the same thing, just going to erase the outline between the feet there, and a little bit just below the tail. Then I'm going to go straight in with that warm grey one and just outline that and add a couple of base layers of that colour down. So I'm just going straight in and outlining the branch here. And on the bottom as well. Just making this a little bit wavier, so it's not quite as smooth and straight. And I'm just going to really lightly erase the graphite just within the centre here. Doesn't need to be that prominent. Like so. And then just going to try not to drop the pencil on the robin. And just going to do exactly the same motion as I did for the base layer on this small section. So I'm just going to use a diagonal shading motion, just filling in the entire area here. So I want to keep a really nice, smooth, light hand. I'm going to go in between the feet, or the toes. All the way up to the edges of the branch. Like so. And then what I'm going to do is work in the opposite direction, just so I can get the maximum coverage on that area. So I was working in this way, and now I'm going to work in this way. So we want to get maximum coverage, we want to get a really nice smooth area to work our subsequent layers on. So we've got two nice layers of the warm grey one down there. So then what we're going to do is start to build up the lighter texture like I did here. As we come down in between the feet, obviously you've got a little bit of shadow cast by the robin itself, so it actually gets a little bit darker just underneath the robin here. So we're not going to need to go as light as we did here, so we can afford to go in with a little bit more pressure and a few more layers. I'm just going to use that circular motion and just leave areas of the warm grey one showing through on the top most section there. And as I said, as we come down towards this area of the branch, the texture tends to get a lot smoother as well, so we're going to be working more with the white to try and blend everything together, get a really nice smooth surface as we come more down towards the other side of the branch. We're just going through and just layering down the nougat in between the feet here, or in between the toes. Just making sure we use that circular motion to convey that sort of smooth but kind of bobbly texture. Like so. So we just want to get the basis of that going. I'm just going to continue all the way down through the top section here. So I'm just using small circular motions, using a really light hand to layer this down. Filling in sort of the darker areas that I can see on the reference, just using the reference as a guide, but making this bit through here a lot darker than what I would this bit over here. So I'm just going to pretty much just shade all of this with the nougat just really lightly. using a mixture of shading back and forth and those circular motions just to try and continue that slight bobbly texture all the way along. In between the feet here we're going to add a layer of nougat as well for that shadow. This one as well. And then just the other side of the foot as well. Like so. I'm just going through and just darkening a few areas where you've got a majority of the shadow. So just going in with another layer of that nougat. I'm just going in and starting to add shadows here and there, just darkening up, adding a couple more layers of that nougat. Just starting to build those shadows between the toes of the bird. Got a really dark shadow just on this foot here. And then I'm going to go over and start to darken up with the warm grey 5. So I'm just using the same technique, just going through the light pressure, just building up some of the darker tones. That's mainly just between the toes and everything here. I'm also going to go through with some of the May green in a second and some of the dark sepia as well, just to really darken up some of the shadows and add that green tone. So I'm just going to add the May green just really loosely and lightly over here. Through the middle, just a little bit more saturated. A little bit in between the feet. I'm going to go through with some of the Indian red. It's a really, really light layer. I'm using the side of the pencil here. You can see. Really, really gently adding this tone down underneath the feet for a little bit of shadow here and there. Going to add a tiny little bit of the Delft blue as well. And then going to go through with some dark sepia and add the real dark tones. So starting to add the dark tones around the feet so that we can define some of the features. So adding in a majority of the shadows here. It's quite a harsh shadow underneath this foot here. Around this toe as well. So just continuing to use that light pressure and slowly build the layers of coloured pencil. I'm just going to go through and just darken up some of these areas, just continue this texture. I'm going to use the warm grey one just to add another layer to the top half here and just work over the existing areas that I've previously drawn here just to blend them out a little bit more. Just going to go in with that dark sepia, just depict some more of the toe here, make it a little bit more defined against that wood texture. Just going to darken it as well with a little bit of the Cerulean brown. I'm just going to continue the shadow on this top half of the branch here with some of the walnut brown. So I'm just going to shade a really light glaze of this over the top of this area of the branch. So using extremely light pressure, just adding this colour over the entire area. adding in some little wood notches as well, some little defining areas. A little bit more green. Going to add a little bit of cinnamon through this top half here. And then on the underside we're just going to continue to add all of that darker tone. So just need something to lean on quickly, if I wasn't going to end up smudging the tail. So I'm just going to line the very bottom with the nougat to begin with. And then just gently shade the very bottom. So just pretty much just shading all the way along the bottom. And then through this central section we're going to add a layer of the May green. Just going to blend this nougat out a little bit, just fade it through. I'm going to add some of the May green. So I've left this gap through the middle, and that's where we're going to add a little bit of the Indian red through there. So I'm just going to add this very middle area where you've got this smooth area of green. So add that. Then I'm just going to really lightly layer down some of the Indian red through this section. Like so. So just fleshing out the shapes within this central section here. Just going in with the point of the Indian red just to really get that colour down. Like so. So you can see how this is building now. And what I'm going to do is use the warm grey one just to go over this entire section and just blend it down a little bit. So I'm using the warm grey one over the white just because it's going to tie in nicely with the colours already down there. Does a good job at blending. Like so. So then we just need to start to build this bottom texture and blend it out into this smooth texture underneath the legs. So to create this texture once more, I'm just going to first of all just begin to darken the very bottom here with the walnut brown. So I'm just going to continue on this dark area, make it really, really dark at the bottom. So you've got that contrast between the light and the dark already playing within the branch. And I'm remembering to keep quite a liney texture for this bottom bit here to mimic this texture that we built through this section. Coming back to here, just going to continue building in these lines and crisscrossing. Leaving these open gaps of the green. But as we come down here, it becomes a lot smoother. I'm just going to build this texture. And then it's just this very, very bottom edge that becomes this So just continuing to go in and darken the very bottom edge, and then just continue to work on darkening some of those lines and strands and everything. And this paper is sticking to me, that's why everything keeps moving there, sorry guys. Going to add some of the May green, shade that down in between. So you've got that sort of green bark area that really sticks out. And saturate the colour a little more through here as well. I'm going to use that warm grey 5 just to blend this grey area down into this green a little bit more as well. Just so it's not quite as bright and it sort of blends really nicely, so you get a really, really natural look rather than these harsh lines of bright colour and then a dull colour. Going to use the Indian red to fill in some sections as well, that red tone. And you've got this really dark red tone which starts this smooth section here. So we're just going to go straight in there, and we're going to go in with a medium pressure and just shade this colour down to get that darker Indian red tone. I'm going to shade it and add some shadows and all of that with some walnut brown as well, so it's not quite as red. And make sure that I add some green around it as well. This is where the green, almost mossy bark has been pulled away, and then you've got the sort of almost like the muscle of the wood showing through, and then further down you've got the muscle comes away and you've got like the bone inside. I'm using like a human body anatomy for describing how this works. Just giving my walnut brown a quick sharpen so we can continue to build all of these textures. We'll go through with the dark sepia and really darken some of these areas, blend it through. Just adding in some darker areas, adding in a little bit more prominent texture on the very top here, just where the light is catching it. You can see a little bit more detail and texture. Shade a little bit more of that green as we come further down. I'm going to use the dark sepia to just shade a lot darker some of these bits on the underneath of the branch here. I'm just going to continue the same technique on this very bottom section here, so I'm going to take up that walnut brown, just continue to darken this and then add some of those little textural lines and everything. Going around the very edge of this Indian red area as well, and just adding a line of the walnut brown so that it looks like that is peeling away. And then just going to shade in some green underneath that, saturate that green tone. And then add in a little bit of the Indian red through some of these cracks and crevices. Darken up and smooth this inner section, just here. On this top edge there's a little bit more of a green tone, so I'm just going to saturate a bit more of that May green on the very top here. Going to saturate a little bit more of that green through the centre. Going to darken it with some walnut brown. So we're going to start to fill in a lot more of the shadows, really start to give this some dimension. And use a little bit of the dark sepia just to continue to really deepen some of these shadows on the underside here. Going to smooth this out with a little layer of the warm grey one as well. And then I'm going to use the dark sepia just to add some textural lines running along the side of this little peel back of the bark there. Okay, I'm going to knock back the colour here as well. Also just going to add a layer of the cinnamon just to tie everything together. And then just add a few shadows underneath the toes of the foot here just so it stands out. Just add a few shadows underneath the nails and everything. So that it looks as natural as possible. I'm going to use some of the Cerulean brown to add a little bit more of a red note to some of these shadows and areas on the bark. I'm just going to use a little bit more of the Delft blue to add a bit more of a blue tint through the top here. Like so. Use the white just to bring out a few more highlights. So now that we've got that area in, we can continue to do this last little section just here. So I'm just going to use another piece of tape just to line that bit off. Get rid of the residue underneath there. So the branch comes down at a slight angle here, so I'm just going to make sure that my piece of tape is straight. And bring the branch down like that. So we've just got this small section to do here. So we have more of the light section to do on the top rather than the dark section on the bottom. Whilst we're here, I'm just going to peel off this side. So I'm going to peel this side off and make sure they've got a nice smooth edge. And we're just going to do exactly the same process for this side, just going to erase the graphite. Not going to bother about the bottom, I'm just going to erase it from the top here. And then I'm going to use the warm grey one. It's going to add a layer all over. So doing exactly the same motion as the previous. I'm going to go through and do 2 passes of the warm grey one. I'm going to do one going in this direction. Just going to line the very top as well so I know where to stop. So that's one layer. I'm just going to go over and do exactly the same but going in the opposite direction. So we end up with a really nice smooth even colour build there. Then we're just going to, this side is a lot lighter, it's much like this side over here, so we don't need to add that many layers. So we're just going to build in really light layers of the nougat to begin with, that brown tone. Then we're going to add in a little bit of the green, then go over to the grey, and then continue this section here. Bring it all the way down. I'm just going to get rid of some of this pencil dust as well whilst I'm here. So I'm just going to use really tiny circular motions using a really light hand just to add this tone down over the top, sort of 2/3 of the branch. I do need to make sure that I do blend it from this slightly darker area into this much lighter area though. So I need to bring that gradual tone down. The tone and the texture is a lot smoother as we come down here, so just really light layers. And a little bit of moss that I just want to build into the end there. Other than that, the layers are pretty much just really light layers of the nougat. We're going to add some of the warm grey 5 really lightly, some of the May green as well, just a really light layer of that May green. So that's what we're going to add now, just some of that May green down. Just really lightly add this over the top. And we're going to add a darker layer above where you've got this graphite line coming down here, where you've got that smoother area. Just going to add a darker, more saturated tone there, and then where I want to add this mossy part as well, I'm just going to add a bit more of a saturated tone into that bit. Making sure that I blend it out into the surrounding areas though. So I'm just going to build in some of the warm grey 5. So exactly the same motion as what I was using with the nougat. Just want to build a really soft colour through here. So we've got some really light layers of some of the grey and some of the brown, some of the green as well. Going to just go over with one more layer of the warm grey 1 and blend it out. I'm also just going to add a little bit of the cinnamon over here. So making quite large rough circles. Try and just really sort of messily add in this colour just to convey the element of light through there. And I'm also going to just shade down a little bit of the Delft blue. Again, just for that little element of light. Just to give that grey a little bit more of a blue tone, make it look a little bit more realistic and convincing. And for the bottom part, I'm just going to go through and start off with the nougat. So I'm going to just line this bottom section here. So you've got this darker section which comes from this area, and it sort of tapers down into barely nothing, and then it just ever so slightly rises up again a little bit towards the bottom here. Like so. And then whilst we have this colour here, I'm just going to go through and just outline some of this central section like this, where you've got the distinction between the green and the red. And then through this middle section we've got the green, so I'm just going to layer the May green down between those two nougat areas. and really saturate that colour, like so. Then either side of that we're going to just layer down some of the Indian red. Going to go in really lightly to begin with. Working either side. Making a small circular motion with the pencil as well as shading back and forth. I'm just going to switch to the walnut brown and just continue to add this last little bit of this texture down the bottom here. So add this last bit in. I'm going to tone it with some of that May green as well. And then just going to continue to darken. I'm going to shade down this green tone within the middle here, so I'm just going to apply a little layer of the walnut brown pretty much all over just to tone it down. And then I'm actually going to blend through there with some of the warm grey one as well, just to blend it out. So I'm applying a bit of a heavier pressure to the pencil at that point. And just continuing to darken this underside here, all the way down. It's just pretty much just going to make it quite all dark. And just using the walnut brown just to shade a little bit above the Indian red area here. Going to just resaturate a little bit of that green. Continuing to build here with some of the walnut brown, the Indian red and the May green. Just going to hype up that green saturation a little bit more again. It's also going to saturate a little bit more of that Indian red tone. Going to use the May green just to go above the red. Through there, and then just going to continue to build some of the walnut brown around the outside here. Build that sort of darker section, that little bit of shadow. So it looks like that this revealed area is slightly coming forward a little bit more. That's what we're going to try and build here. And then we're pretty much done. I'm going to leave this pretty simple, just add a little bit more shading here and there. Going to go through with some of that warm grey 5, just build in some shadows with that, some dark sepia. And that's pretty much all we're going to do for the robin here. Just want to keep the branch really simple. Don't really want to detract too much away from the robin itself. So just want to keep everything relatively clean, relatively simple. Build in a little bit of the shadows here. I'm just going to smooth in some of these greener areas just by burnishing a little bit with the May green through here. So just going to use some circular motions to build up the grey texture through the bottom section of the branch here. Got this slightly darker green mossy area, which I'm just going to add just by shading a little bit of that warm grey 5 into that green area and just letting it sort of fade out as it is there. Again, don't want to add too much detail, too much texture, don't want to detract away from the robin itself. So pretty much just going to leave it there. There's not really much else that I can add to the commentary of this part that's going to benefit you guys anymore, so I'm just going to stop it there. What I will end up doing is maybe coming back to it after a couple of days and just making any adjustments, so adjusting those darker values as I always do. You can see now I'm just going through with a little bit of dark sepia just to darken up this bottom section just here, just to push back the shadows a little bit more, saturate a little bit more of that green colour in there. What this might actually need is just a little bit of a darker green colour, maybe like a bit of pine green or something, just to increase that shadow value, especially as you come down here. It's a little bit more of a darker green rather than just red and brown. But that's all I pretty much do, just continue to just leave it, work on it until I am somewhat happy with it, just using exactly the same colour palette as we've got here, trying to tie everything into one another. Just going to add a little bit of that cinnamon colour down here just to tie the whole branch together. Makes sense as we use a little bit of cinnamon through the rest of the area here. But the robin himself I'm actually pretty pleased with. I'm just going to zoom out so you can see the whole thing. As you can see, the robin is the main focus. We've just got this really simple branch. It's going to look really effective when it's sitting in a frame. Everything always looks so much better when it is framed. But yeah, basically that is it for this tutorial. Just really simple processes. You want to keep your layers really nice and light. Just gradually build your colours. Have some patience with it, especially this spark texture. This is probably the trickiest thing to render within this tutorial, that and the bird feet, because the bird feet I always find a pain as well. But I really hope that you have enjoyed this tutorial, and I really hope that we get to sit together with another tutorial in the future. Bye!